the Watchmen movie, and now this. All right, Resident Evil 5. Didn't really like it. Now, just so you know, when I'm taping this now is before this review has gone up, so I have no idea what the reaction is going to be, but I do have a sense that my score for it and my evaluation of the game is going to skew a little bit lower than what maybe the median is. So I assume there will be maybe a post underneath my review that's up on the site. Having said that, I would like to think that you've read my review, not just watched the video review, not just looked at the pros and cons that are at the top, but have actually read it, because I took a lot of time doing that. And it really brought home for me something about reviewing games and game reviewers in general. We work actually very hard on those reviews, just for the simple fact that most games can be 10, 15 hours, and there's an obligation to really play it through all that time. And so you've already spent more time reviewing a game than I think most film reviewers have spent, just given the fact that most movies are, 2.5 hours. And really the expectation in these reviews are different than what you see in most other critical evaluations of art. Really, if you read most movie reviews, they kind of summarize the plot, they talk about some high points if the acting was good, and they say if it was good or not. Really, there's been this tradition in game reviews of talking about all the myriad aspects of the game, because what goes into a game to make it fun is much different than what goes into, say, a film, which is pretty much the narrative thrust of it. But we talk about the story, we talk about the controls, we talk about the graphics, we talk about the extras, and all those things as if that's going to somehow in an aggregate come to a numerical score, which, as I've said before, I hate giving games. I would rather just have the review right there. But the fact is, it's still a review, and it is a matter of opinion, and you go by your gut. And the thing is, my gut just didn't go for Resident Evil 5. I did find that there was no reason to have these controls, and that the game that they developed seemed to be, in many cases, at odds with the controls that they provided. There's no reason in this day and age why you couldn't have more freedom with the character. And it doesn't really make it scary, as many people have always argued. That's why you had these controls throughout all of Resident Evil, that somehow that the restrictions provided by those controls create all of the tension. I really don't buy that. I think the tension that's created is because you're frustrated that you can't have freedom of movement. Also, I think there was a sense when they were developing the game that by adding the co-op, and by this I'm meaning the AI co-op, that would help alleviate some of the frustrations that might come from the controls. And you know what? That AI, it just did not do what it needed to do to really experience the game as you can when you have another human player. But face it, I really believe that the Resident Evil series has been a single-player game. I'm very happy that they allow for co-op, because it's a much better experience to play it that way. But there are many people out there that probably are not expecting to have one friend play with them for the 12 to 15 hours of the game. That's a fairly hefty commitment. And the game really only plays right when you're playing it that way. In the single-player, you can completely get through the game. I got through the game with quite a bit of frustration, and it just didn't feel satisfying. And that's the other thing, is that if you took the controls out of the game, I'm not thinking I'd be giving this a 5. There's some very good points to the game. This section right here, that's in the beginning, and then there's the native village. There's something very inspired about the way that the sequences play out. The rest of it just doesn't have anywhere near that level of inspiration. There's very familiar types of settings, factories and laboratories, and it becomes sort of more of a corridor shooter, and it really just kind of becomes a shooter, which has never been that typical for Resident Evil. Even though there's so much more shooting in Resident Evil 4, that sense of horror and anxiety and puzzles really permeated it, and it had a more consistent point of view. This one just seems to be something of a hodgepodge. And even with good controls, I would still think that it was, an okay action game. Really, it's just kind of a disappointment for me. As I put in my review, the game just feels a little bit timid, that it wasn't going to, take on some really new, aggressive ideas of how you can play the game. Co-op's not that innovative. I'm just going to throw that out there right now. It does feel a little bit timid, and I think that there was great potential for it. And that's why I said at the end, I think it's kind of a shame. And it's just not right to reward this game, because it's hewing to the tradition of how Resident Evils have played in the past, in light of the fact that there are so many amazing developers out there that are trying very, very ambitious things in their games, and they, for the most part, are getting it right. And really, for a point of contrast, the other zombie game that comes out of Capcom, Dead Rising, boy, did that game have horrible flaws in the AI of the people you're trying to save in the shopping mall. But at the same time, There was never not a moment in that game when it wasn't brimming with something new and really exciting that I had never seen or thought of being able to do inside of a game. That inspiration makes it very easy to look past the flaws, and that inspiration just isn't there in Resident Evil 5, and that highlights those flaws, and it was something I found inescapable the entire time I was playing it. So, I know the review reads a little bit cranky pants, so I thought I would give a more, toned down version right here. Anyway, as I said, please read the review. It took me a couple of days to try to pump that out, and, here's to better games in the future.